Hi, I'm Jake Stiles, CEO of Stiles Associates. Joining me today is Darryl Greene. Most recently, Darryl was the Executive Director of Continuous Improvement for the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top 5 hospitals in the country. He has recently written this book, Experiencing Improvement, which talks about the lean transformation effort he led at the Cleveland Clinic. Darryl, thanks for joining this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me why you wrote this book.
You know, the book was really written to recognize and to thank the caregivers, senior, middle, and frontline caregivers that we collaborated with. They embarked upon a journey of change, lean transformation, and we wanted to highlight their successes and we wanted to highlight the efforts. And that's really what the book is a tribute to them. The other thing, as I would say, is we sort of framed it from the standpoint of 2 perspectives. One was their perspective, what they experienced through the transformation, and the other was our perspective coming from different industries into healthcare.
Sure.
And what we experienced. So that's really the reason for the title, Experiencing Improvement.
Yeah, when you look at your background, you've led these transformations in a number of different industries, including discrete manufacturing, financial services, and then the last 8 years with the Cleveland Clinic. I'm curious what you saw as the major differences, and what did you learn along the way?
Yeah, I think first I say it's been fun. It's been a nice ride. I think there's a fundamental question a lot of people are always asking is, can you take a proven approach, lean transformation from manufacturing and apply it in an environment like financial services or apply it in an environment like healthcare? And I think the answer to that is yes. You truly can get an ROI and you truly can have a cultural impact. So that'd be the first thing I would say, is that it does work in the case of those who are asking that. I think the second thing I would probably say is that leadership is absolutely critical. And the reality is leaders need to lead and they need to sponsor all the way from the beginning when you start to really sponsoring as the program's getting going, and then all the way in terms of just an ongoing visibility that leader has to provide in order for really to sustain itself. Would be another key thing I would say in terms of a discovery. And then perhaps another I would say is just the fact that it's hard. The reality is it's hard. It's transformation, and so you think about transformation, you're changing from status quo. So I don't know about you, but in my case, whenever I'm asked to change, I struggle with having to change. And so the reality is it is hard, but if you can put it into a strategy of implementation and how to navigate, it can be done.
We've both been involved in assisting lean transformations in one form or another for a lot of years. And the key component always seems to be that leadership engagement. How did you inspire leaders to get engaged across any of the industries that you worked in? And what were some of the challenges associated with that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the importance of the leader and inspiring them, I think it starts with first just connecting with them. It really is meeting them where they are. So you can't walk in telling them what needs to be done. That's just not going to work. I think time has to be spent with that leader, listening and understanding what do they really need, and then trying to actually meet them where they are. So in the case of healthcare, I actually started on going on the nursing floors and rounding with the physician and the nurses, just so I could understand what their environment was. And all I did was listen. I did not suggest at first. So I think some of the inspiration came from the fact that I wasn't trying to do something to them. I was trying to collaborate, understand what they need, and then work alongside them to actually move it forward. I think the other thing, inspiration comes with you allowing them to see some success. They have to see the success. So whatever they've picked or whatever you're focusing on, you got to get the results, Jake. You know this. Right. If you're not getting the results, or if you're not impacting what their interests are, there is no inspiration.
Right.
And so that was another piece, is that we made sure that whatever we locked in on and collaborated on together, that we made sure some success happened on the back end.
Darryl, based on your experience across multiple industries in the reporting structures within those industries, clearly there is a far more dynamic, fluid reporting structure within the healthcare industry, where physicians have far more influence and autonomy than other executives do in other industries. Curious, what challenges did that cause, and specifically within the healthcare industry, and how did you approach that?
The hierarchy piece, which is some of what we're talking about, and just sort of the span of control, was probably one of the hardest elements to really understand and then think about how to manage and maneuver within. If you think about financial services and you think about manufacturing, they've got good incentives. So the bonus structure and other mechanisms are the way in which you actually can incent people to be involved. So I remember GE, it was 40% of income was tied to transformation. Mm-hmm. So that pretty much rallies the troops pretty mm-hmm. quickly. Financial services, similar. You get a bonus structure. You got some kind of incentive at year end that's some multiplicative factor of your base. So those are good reasons for people to be engaged and involved. As you point out, once you get to healthcare, those incentives don't exist that way. And the ability for a top-down edict is a little bit harder. It's important, but it's harder. And what we found is you literally have to go to each physician. Each physician has been trained. Each physician has really practiced and been rewarded for their specialty and their knowledge. Right. And that has to be acknowledged when you're doing the lean transformation. You have to spend time, again, sort of understanding what's in it for them.
Sure.
And trying to match that, what's in it for them. And then based on some of the success, if you can build a good relationship, then you can start to inject some of what you need. So if their interest, as an example, is I want to get access to some of my patients, improve the access, and that's where they want to start, great.
Sure.
But then you can start to bring in other things to say, hey, we did the access. Now imagine what we could do if we start looking at turnover.
Right.
If we start looking at other things that perhaps you're facing. So it's doable. It's just an acknowledgement that the hierarchy and the incentives don't create the spread as quickly in healthcare, because there isn't that same structure. So you really got to spend time with each physician leader.
Yeah, it's a cell by cell.
It's a cell by cell. Whether you want to say SELL or CELL, from a standpoint of an organism, it is a cell by cell. Right. Yeah.
It's interesting. Let's talk about the value proposition for a minute. And we experienced that when we were supporting at the clinic with the work that we were doing. The value proposition of getting people to change industries and come to healthcare was very apparent. It was clear the first day, as soon as they walked into the clinic, they felt differently about the work they were doing because they were affecting people's lives. How would you talk about the value proposition from your perspective and how you use that to your benefit?
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of the value proposition, I see where there's perhaps the most galvanizing effect is linked to patients. So, anytime you're struggling through a problem or you're trying to frame an opportunity, typically if you can get it in the context of talking about patients, just about every caregiver rallies. It truly is the heart of why they're there. It's part of the DNA. At least that's what I've experienced. It's very much part of their DNA. So we spend a lot of time, I'll give you an example. There's certain projects where you might, if I came to a particular leader and said, hey, I can improve your equipment utilization, they're going to look at me and say, what are you talking about? I can get more patients through your existing equipment, which is going to allow you to see more patients and allow you to, in essence, affect more lives. That's a different discussion. Mm-hmm. So I think you got to tailor it towards what's important to them, and I think that the patient is a very, very powerful value proposition ongoing. The other thing is, what is happening now is I think there's a new value proposition that's here, and it is truly cost. It's value in of itself. And so years ago, if we would have mentioned cost, we would have faced a lot of pain. Mentioning costs in financial services or manufacturing is just second nature, right? We got to reduce the cost. Yes, we got to reduce the cost. How do we do it? In healthcare, initially, one of the things that we saw was talking about cost. Actually, was somewhat of a challenge around the fact that there's a true belief that whatever is required to save a life, you do that. And the cost is not what's going on in
Sure.
someone's head.
Yeah.
It truly is, I've got to take care of the individual who's in front of me. And so I think part of what we spent some time doing, and I really applaud leadership for this, is they started to talk about the reason why cost is relevant. And the reason why cost is relevant is ultimately that means that if I can reduce my cost, I have more margin. I have more capital. If I have more capital, I can reinvest. If I can reinvest, I can give you more equipment, I can give you more resources, I can give you the buildings that are needed, I can give you the OR rooms that are needed, supplies and so forth. So that reinvestment actually became a very powerful.
I can train with that reinvestment?
Absolutely, I can train with that, that's exactly right.
Right.
And now, of course, there's healthcare reform.
Right.
That's a very, very good value proposition and
Burning
incentive.
platform.
Very good burning platform. And as you know, everyone's talking about value in the context of quality over cost. And that quality can range all the way from services to thinking about safety to the actual clinical outcomes. And dollarizing all that is truly, I think, in reason, and people are starting to understand the importance of the cost of the services as well as the outcomes of the services.
Sure, sure.
So,
Well, speaking about, you mentioned dollarizing in your last statement. How important is it to dollarize ROI on an ongoing basis as you're driving these transformations?
you know, my experience is we initially, depending on even any industry, there's sort of this culture or results. It's an interesting discussion that tends to happen. Do you worry about impacting the culture and then the results come? Do you start with results and then assume the culture will come? It's sort of how folks tend to look at it. And at the end of the day, these are all businesses. Any way you look at it, whether I'm in financial services, whether I'm in manufacturing, whether I'm in healthcare, they're still businesses. And they exist because they have some type of return that is allowing them to do so through the promise that they've made in terms of the quality of what they offer, but also in terms of managing their responsibility in terms of financial discipline. Right. So dollarizing what we do is critical for the survival of the business. And your question around, you know, talking about sustainability and the importance around sustainability, you know, whether we were at JP Morgan Chase or whether we were at the clinic, you know, over $100 million worth of savings over multiple years, a total $100 million over multiple years. I think it was the seeing the 2 to 3 times the return on the investment, which for us really meant that for whatever we cost, we had to at least achieve 2 to 3 times that cost in terms of what was, in essence, either revenue or cost reduction. Seeing that year after year, in that fashion, that's what I'm defining as sustainability that you were asking, shows that the culture, truly something has happened in the context of the culture in order for that kind of return to happen year over year. And so I think when you talk about the dollars, you can't just think about a single year. It's important, but I think you also have to think about the ability to show it over multiple years and let that be a measure of truly you having had some sustainability and impact on the culture.
Well, absolutely, particularly when you start dollarizing that ROI outside of your own team. I know that you're looking for 2 to 3 times in terms of ROI, the cost to your team, but as you really start to train people, train the masses, train the front line, and they start to, it's one of the reasons that suggestion programs are so powerful. They start to come up with their own improvement ideas, and you give them the tools, you give them the support required to be able to garner that type of thinking. That's really where it starts to pay back.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I mean, if I look at either location in terms of whether it's financial services being a location or healthcare, we never said our team earned this.
Right.
You know, we said, hey, in collaboration with the caregivers or in collaboration with the front line, these savings were earned, right? So, I mean, that was a critical component. And then what you see is, what you want to do is, you want to make sure, and this is perhaps one of the things, if I were, if you were to talk about what I would do differently, you got to make sure you don't start owning the transformation.
Yeah.
You gotta make sure that your group is not the group that's starting to be looked upon as the ones. And to your point, that you truly are engaging the others to in turn do additional work, right? Your hope is that once they experience it, now they're going to start to actually embody it and use it and apply it so they can see more issues freely and they can address those issues freely. I think that's, to me, one of the challenges is making sure that you don't have one group or one individual own it. And to your point,
absolutely.
Spread it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Again, you've been involved in driving these transformations at GE, at Maytag,
Hoover, vacuum cleaner Maytag.
Yeah, Hoover, and then with JP Morgan, and then at the Cleveland Clinic. Vastly different industries. What did you learn along the way that changed your model or affected how you were thinking about these transformation efforts?
Yeah, don't jump in industries every other year.
Right.
No, actually, I consider myself to be very fortunate to have been able to go from industry to industry because of the transformation work.
Right.
So my ability to actually move between them was truly driven by an interest level and the opportunity to utilize something that was working in one place to another industry. To answer your question about some of what was learned and so forth, some of it's a little bit what you said a minute ago, which is that value proposition is so important in selecting what is that value proposition and the sustainability of that value proposition. So, for instance, particularly in healthcare is so busy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, very busy place because of all that they're trying to deliver in terms of patient care. And so for you to assume that I can just deliver this year and sort of, rest on the success of that is very dangerous. So one is the value proposition and selecting it, but then sustaining that value proposition year over year, like we were talking about, is one thing that I think is absolutely critical for all these transformations, is to show that it's worth doing, because it requires a lot. Leadership, I got to tell you, I know people read about it. I know folks think about it. And I will tell you over and over again, it determines success or failure. No matter how many books you read or look at it, it always, always comes back to the leadership. And I'd say at multiple levels. I think quite often folks are quick to say, only one level. I think it's at multiple levels. I think you got the executive leadership, but you also have to think about the leadership at other levels. And the reason why that leadership is so important is because at the end of the day, and you know this even from the standpoint of being a CEO of Stiles Associates, people are going to pursue what you show is important. And you highlight and you reinforce over and over and over again. I mean, think about it. How do you get your folks to actually deliver on the goals that you all set collaboratively?
Having a clear set of goals and being there to support them along the way.
Right. And you're very, very visible. Yeah. Right. And so I think it's exactly the same thing. So, we had great success at the clinic where you could see where, the leadership was active and consistently there. And then you had some places where you have pockets where you've got some challenges, and you typically can relate that back to leadership. And then I think the other thing I would say that is important too is it's back to just I've got to get the results. I do have to get the results. And if you can get the results, then obviously you're going to continue to show that what you're doing is worth doing.
Right. Right.
So that would be a big piece.
Yeah, I mean, a good change agent is to understand how to do both and engage the hearts and minds and get the results. Yeah. Consistently.
Yeah. One of the things that I definitely learned looking across my experiences and so forth is, back to this piece about leadership. And we have to spend time with the leadership. And, you know, in hindsight, if I had to do it over again, I'm convinced that if I had spent some more additional time with the executive leadership, you know, some of the impact and some of the outcomes would be even more so than they were. And once you lose sight of the leadership and lose sight of spending
Sure.
time with the leadership, you know, shame on you. It's my
Yeah.
responsibility to
Yeah.
do that. That is what I'm there for. And so I think that's one of the things I would tell anybody
Yeah.
who's doing this change transformation and lean transformation is leadership is where a huge, matter of fact, the largest proportion of your time
Yeah,
should be
absolutely.
spent. Because they affect everything. And
Yeah.
you know this being the leader of Stiles
Yeah.
Associates.
Well, don't be too hard on yourself. I mean, $105 million in cost reductions over 5 years at the Cleveland Clinic really speaks to a lot of things we've been talking about in terms of cultural engagement and the actual change process.
Yeah, I appreciate it. But again, it's continuous improvement,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we all sort of reflect.
Don't hang your hat on it.
We all
Yeah.
sort of reflect and then
Yeah.
think about what those possibilities
Right,
are.
right.
So I appreciate your words, but I'm always trying to figure out how we do it better.
Yeah, spoken like a true lifelong learner.
There you go.
Hey, let's talk about the pace of change. I mean, clearly the pace of change in the different industries you've served in has been different. And talk to me a little bit about that experience and how you manage that.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you in healthcare, the pace of change for me, for a given initiative, tends to be slower. But for a multitude of initiatives, is perhaps quite fast. And so what I mean by that is I've never seen an industry that has to have had focus on so much at the same time. It's not simple enough to say, hey, I'm only going to worry about patient access. I'm only going to sit here and think about value relative to cost reduction. Or, you know, by the way, I'm only going to be thinking about the fact that, you know, I've got another 30 million people who are going to be coming into an opportunity to have health care. It's not practical to pick one. So you've got to pick all of those. And really, how do you manage such a large scope and portfolio is, I think, one of the greatest challenges that is faced. So the multitude of what has to be done affects that pace. I think the other thing that affects the pace is the place is so busy. Mm-hmm. And so when you are busy, it's one of those things where you have many things in the air at the same time. Yeah. Something's not getting done while perhaps you're over here, but then once this is spinning, I can go back over here and I can start to address it. Right. So I think it's just the fact that the pace in healthcare is different. I think the other thing that has to do with it is, as well as there's, you know, in healthcare, what you see, because that energy is so much on the patient, I think part of the challenges that you have is how do you actually get the time with the leaders to actually do the work when the energy is truly the patient. Versus, I think, in some of the other industries, doing it right there in the context of the work or pulling people off to do some of that work and so forth is more doable. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just simply saying I think that's some of the challenges that perhaps healthcare faces.
Yeah, and understanding the dynamics that are taking place in any industry, any business, before you really start to ask the tough questions is critical. Yeah. And clearly, you know, the healthcare is full of dynamics.
I mean, it's
multiple focus areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, you know, you think about it, and in financial services, and if I'm doing something like in the back office in terms of check processing or something like that, and I'm able to pull folks away in order to do a multi-day, you know, event. Right. I can't go into healthcare and say, okay, hey, look, I want all you all to stop doing your surgery, so forth and so on, and we're going to do a multi-day. Now, if you schedule it appropriately, again, knowing the dynamics, like you're saying, if you schedule it 30 days in advance so that you know you're going to get that physician to be available to actually participate in that event, that's kind of the dynamics, I think, that you're talking about. So it's not that it's not doable. It's just that you got to be in tune, and I think you're spot on. I mean, you really have to understand your environment in order to then start to think about, well, how do I take what I know works and apply it in this environment in a way that fits this environment and matches really what the caregiver needs and matches what we're trying to do in terms of collaborating to make things better.
You know, it's interesting, in all the work we've done across numerous industries, there's always a learning curve, a learning period for a new employee coming in. And without fail, every engagement we've been involved with in healthcare in general, the message or the advice we've always given to that candidate on the way in is take time, take 6 months if you have to really understand the dynamics and develop relationships before you even attempt to really drive change.
Yeah, there's a level of support that you get when you spend time understanding and acknowledging the frontline or the caregiver's circumstances, right? It's almost a statement of respect. I respect what you're doing. I respect how you do it. I want to figure out how I can help you in some way, form, or fashion. And so to start off by talking, not usually,
Right.
usually a good idea.
Right.
As someone who's actually working with them, who's trying to help lead the improvement efforts.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's interesting with that too is, at what point do you get individuals who internally have learned it enough to become leaders to help move that transformation forward? It's sort of back to your comment earlier. You'd like to pass it along so that folks are doing that work every single day. And so when you start to have that happen, where in our case, what we saw is, and what we appreciated is, early on, we would pretty much spend a lot of time being thoughtful of when can we pull the physicians into sessions, okay, so scheduling and so forth. Then what we started to think about is, well, can we get into their training? Can we at least have training sessions with them? And so the nice thing is the clinic had provided some physician leadership training, and we got into that curriculum. And so in the context of that curriculum, we in turn would then say, well, how many of you in here are here because you've heard about this,
Right.
or are here because you're ready to go and you're anxious to get out of
Yeah.
here and start to apply? And we would really look at the ones who are over here to the far right, who would come up during or after the class and say, hey, I'm interested.
Yeah.
And then I think the ultimate step that I thought was very impactful that the clinic did was, starting to really identify time for physicians to do this work.
Right.
So literally they would say, hey, percentage of your time, 10 or 20% of your time is going to be spent to help lead the continuous improvement
Right,
effort and the change transformation and lean transformation. And that was a very powerful message, I think, to the organization. And then to see that, that leadership occur from a physician's vantage point obviously had a big impact as well in terms of garnering the interest of other physicians.
Yeah, and you think about the burning platform concept that in many cases is required to ignite this type of transformation. And it's different. It's going to be different from system to system. It's going to be different in a large system than it is in a smaller system. You've got different pressures, different dynamics. So even in the same system, you may have had institutes at the clinic, Cleveland Clinic, that had a burning platform, had a need that and as a result, they were pulling on you a lot harder than other institutes. But in your efforts to really drive this message and this work across all institutes, how did you ignite or how did you create that burning platform when it wasn't there? And not only for the Cleveland Clinic, this goes with financial services or manufacturing, your experience in all those industries.
Yeah, the burning platform, and we'll just sort of go through them based
Yeah.
on what you had described. It sort of gets back to a little bit what we discussed before, which is understanding the what's in it for me.
Sure.
And I don't mean that selfishly at all. I think it's just you got to connect, and so that's part of it. But what we started to do was we spent a lot of time in relationship building. And the reason why was because it was a source of information as well as it was obviously a source of ambassadorship that it provided. But it was a very big source of information. And why is that so relevant? Well, we were constantly trying to figure out how do we align what we have to offer with what the organization needed strategically. And so to me, that burning platform is you got to get to the strategy. even if it's in a local level, there's still a strategy of what someone's trying to do. But ultimately, you want to get to the executive level strategy. And so, in the case of manufacturing, typically efficiency and cost was a pretty significant burning platform, which was part of the pillars or the strategic priorities of those of those industries. In the case of financial services, because we worked in the back office, very much it had to do with clearly what a lot of the customers wanted, because we were in check processing, and we were trying to make sure that anything from when you deposited your money, you knew as soon as possible that you had those funds, to making sure you got your statements on a timely basis so you're able to make decisions about your money and so forth. So it was very much a customer centric focus, but it was also understanding that how can I do that as efficient and as fast as possible. And I think the burning platform for healthcare, at least when we started, and a lot of what we talked about was managing the busyness and managing the flow. Moving patients through, and because the experience that patients were dealing with was a big deal. All the way from when I make that initial call to when I get there, to if I do or don't do surgery, to how soon can I go home, to including my family in that whole process. So that was sort of where we started. But what I love is now that the Affordable Care Act is truly active, and to me that has created in of itself a burning platform for healthcare. And you see the concerted effort, whether you're payer, provider, or employer, or patient.
Sure.
Everybody is now actively involved in trying to figure out how to make healthcare better.
Sure.
I mean, you can argue all you want about many of the aspects of it. At the end of the day, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that you didn't have payers, providers, employers, and patients and their families all trying to figure out how things can be better.
Well, to that point, you think about the visibility that's being driven into healthcare right now in terms of patients being able to go online, look at the outcome record, successful outcome record, and make their decision based on that and the cost associated with that for a particular procedure, and how that affects any number of organizations.
Yeah, the transparency is now, what is it? It's just like anything else, right? You know this well. Hey, if I have a metric, I understand how I'm performing. Now I have the ability to see whether good or bad, or opportunity, or improvement. And now I'm going to pursue what's going to be best for me and make some better decisions. So it's all about getting people information to make better decisions.
And competition makes us all better.
And competition makes us better. Now that, I can say that right now.
Yeah.
but again, I think that the lean transformation and all the work in terms of improvement work has a foundation now in healthcare, unlike it ever had before. And so this is the time. I mean, this is the moment in my mind. And I don't mean it in the sense of it sounding as short as a moment can be. This moment is probably the next 5 to 10 years at a minimum. But this is the time to really take a lot of what we've known and learned in other places and collaborate with the physicians, the payers, the providers, and others, and really create something that's going to improve healthcare for patients and families.
How impactful, Daryl, is it to have functional leaders in specific roles? And let's take healthcare for this instance. How impactful it is to have functional leaders that actually understand lean, or at a minimum, support it because they have a sense of really what it can ultimately do for a patient.
Well, I tell you, I would love it if I could have individuals who both understood the technical aspects of the business, whether it's care delivery, how to do care delivery well, and also understood the practices and principles of lean and other improvement work. I mean, because you bring those two together, right? Now I've got a different awareness, I've got a different ability to to see the opportunities, the waste. I've got a different ability to address some of that, standardize where appropriate, and have an impact. So I mean, I think it is absolutely a goal. I think there's some realities that you have to work with, which is that, to say that every physician is going to become an expert in lean and or any other aspect of improvement work is not realistic. I mean, it's just not realistic. So, but to educate, run alongside, experience through practice, coach significantly, make meaning of it for them, so that they understand it. They start to at least understand its principles and its purpose and its direction. They're going to start to affect other people around them. They're going to definitely, and I mean their physician peers, as well as the other caregivers that work with them, in terms of their staff and nursing and mid-level providers and others. And that's just impactful.
Sure.
I mean, it sort of gets back to, I'm looking to see what my leader values. I'm looking to see how my leader applies it. If my leader's doing it, there must be something about it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's an opportunity. I just think it has its challenges that you got to manage through.
Yeah, and really at its core, really what it boils down to is you're really trying to create that aha moment in every individual, or as many individuals as you can, because that's where the spread is.
So it's funny you mentioned the aha moment. Really, the book, Experiencing Improvement, was all about that aha moment. That whether you're senior, middle, or frontline, when you're doing the transformation work and improvement work, when you start to clearly see what your issue is and you have the ability to actually address it and see the improvement. I don't know anybody, I'd be interested in your thoughts, but I don't know anyone who hasn't gone through a, oh my. Sure, yeah. I get it. I get the possibilities associated with this, and then that's where you want to really start to impact that. And so the book that was co-authored, really, and the reason why we title it Experiencing Improvement, was very much around the fact that you got to get people to that aha moment. Mm-hmm. And if I can get them to the aha moment, now I have the opportunity to start talking about the spread. Mm-hmm. How do I start to really make sure they've got the tools, the support, and the mechanisms to now do it again, and do it again, and constantly start to go from reactive to that proactive stance, where they're constantly sort of surveying and seeing, how am I doing, what's happening, where do I see opportunity, how I address that opportunity, great, let's move on, is what we're really trying to get towards. So exciting, it's very exciting.
Talk about the strategy that you've used, regardless of industry, to really create the spread, create the wildfire, if you will. Yeah,
I think about all the organizations, right? So the GEs and Hoover / Maytags and J.P. Morgan Chase and even Key Corp, and of course now the clinic. Very large organizations, very complex organizations. And the reality is, we spend a lot of time talking about what we would consider to be sort of breadth, depth strategy. So the breadth is sort of, what's the basic tools and practices that you can give the organization so that they can start to understand how they're performing and make some small improvements. And the depth strategy was really, hey, in a given area, division, line, and or institute, across all of those different industries, how do you really focus in that particular area and go deep and really start with impacting the folks through the aha moment and really starting to embody it every single day. Right. So a lot of energy was spent in putting in some basic things that were needed in each of those industries. And what I would say is back to our conversation about some of the incentives and so forth, the breadth and depth for a GE happened much faster because of that incentive. Mm-hmm. Once you say 40%, truly, everyone was brought in from the different businesses, and it was made very clear So that has a breadth right away. And then the depth really is them starting to pull together their teams and their organizations and training and application and really putting it into the strategy and making sure the cascading deployment occurs and all the energy is around that. It was really what was happening in those spaces. So that's more of the manufacturing, if you will, and the GE, and I would say even to some degree some of the other big ones. The financial services, was an interesting deployment because truly we started with the front line. We really believed that if we could get visual management in every major area within the check processing operations, independent of site, that was going to be a very powerful tool for the front line to actually have an opportunity to see what they were doing and see what the issues were, common measures, common way of looking at their information, and then helping them to solve their problems. And then how do you translate that then? How do I take a site that's in Detroit and translate that to a site that's in Indianapolis? So that was sort of the spread, and yet I could go into a given area and spend more time at a given site and really go deep. And then I would say that the clinic was another different animal. We didn't have the opportunity to say we're going to put visual management everywhere. We're going to do all. The beauty of the clinic was there were other support groups that were doing business intelligence, so they were doing a lot of scorecarding, and they were really, so we partnered with these folks, and we're like, hey, you're doing scorecards, we're all about a balanced scorecard. How do we get that across the organization so everybody's starting to look at measures that come from the executive leadership, and that's sort of the spread. And then a lot of time spent in how do we bring people together to have reviews and have dialogue around how they're performing. And because I had similar metrics across sites, I had the opportunity to do apples to apples comparison, which was big. And now when I start seeing I've got the issues and so forth, and because I've cascaded as best I can from above those common measures, now how do we start to solve the problems? That was some of the breadth, and then the depth. We tried something a little bit different. We deployed and embedded resources into given areas. And I got to tell you, I have to thank you again, quite frankly, Stiles Associates, because you were part of my thought leadership, and I really appreciated the advice that you and your brother Ted had provided when we met on a regular basis around how do I get a resource into an area so I can truly go deep and really have that resource be on point. Working in collaboration, keyword, working in collaboration with that leadership, and becoming part of that leadership team, and helping to see all the opportunities to integrate it. And that, to me, was a big game changer.
Right. Well, thank you for the compliment on the thought leadership piece. We certainly enjoyed supporting your efforts at the clinic for 8 years. It's interesting from a thought leadership standpoint, having been in this business for 20 years and assisting all sorts of companies through transformations. We've all become students of these transformations. We know what works, we know what doesn't, we know what the structure should look like within any organization. And so a lot of our conversations over the 8 years that we worked together supporting at the Cleveland Clinic, as I recall, were really org structure related. They were what lessons can we take from other industries that are going to be effective here? Because when it boils down to, when you really study all those successful transformations, a lot of the approaches they used were very simple. The embedding approach that we use within the institutes, that's no different necessarily from a manufacturing plant having a lean leader in it. And so in watching and studying those transformations and looking at the rate of success was very important to us. So whether you asked for it or not, when you hired us, it just comes with the territory, and we can't not go there with you. Yeah. And it's in our DNA now, and we really feel it's part of the value add that we bring to all of our clients.
Yeah, I think the and I would agree with your comment around the fact that there are some common elements for success.
Sure.
I would agree with you. I think the power of the thought leadership, quite frankly, is you've got your lens, which is looking outward. You got my lens, which is looking inward. And putting those together to start to try to understand respectfully what's needed in my space, and being innovative about what's happening out there and trying to figure out how to bring that together and bring it in and make it successful is really, I think, is what's neat about the whole relationship that we had. So I really do, that's where I'm coming from. My energy of appreciation is that.
Well, thank you. And without those conversations are critical because without them, we would not have been able to support you. You know, when we think about the type of people that were going to be successful at the clinic, at the Cleveland Clinic, we had many discussions around, what does that person look like?
Yeah, the thing is, it also, what it did for me is it helped me to see that, I went in thinking, okay, if I'm thinking about the individual that's going to be successful in helping the transformation, I'm pondering their fit into the culture, their willingness to listen, and yet their expertise, their willingness to influence in a way that is actually respectful and encouraging, and helping people make meaning of the tools and the practices. I mean, that is almost one of the number one things, helping people make meaning of the tools and practices in their environment is the opportunity. And so our discussions around who are these people and finding these people was paramount. And I think we were very successful from the way in which we collaborated. So
Yeah, it was a good team effort.
it was a good team. It also speaks to, though, and thinking about that partnership is just partnerships in general. Right. And one thing I'm absolutely sure of is there, in any transformation that is of significant size and complexity, you can't do it by yourself. I mean, you need partners. Right? You need some internal partners, you even need some external partners, because there's no one person who's got all the solutions. So, you got change management in there. You've clearly got the tools and practices of lean transformation in there that you got to be thinking about. I think you've got some learning and development that has to happen on a consistent basis. You've got all the infrastructure that needs to happen to bring data and information, process, and act upon that. I mean, I just don't know anybody who can go in and try to pursue something that they don't start to connect to some of the other folks. And again, some of learned through a lot of the thought leadership dialogue. So,
going back to the subject we were talking about earlier around how impactful is it to have leaders, functional leaders, that at the very least support lean or support that type of thinking. With all the clients we've supported over the years, it's been really interesting to watch. I'll use the spread that occurs as these companies, as these organizations in a variety of different industries really start to see the power of what they're trying to get their hands around. And we have built our business and been pulled by our clients into into a lot of different functional areas because of the need to have that type of support, say in finance or supply chain or concurrent engineering manufacturing, what have you. You need that team. It's a team effort. So whether or not you bring them in from the outside or you train your internal people, it works, but the focus really needs to be on giving frontline leadership, giving executive leadership the tools, the training, so that they can start to live and breathe it into what they're driving their organization to do every day. And that's really where we've noticed, and that's really where we've seen major transformations occur. And it doesn't have to occur in a short period of time, but if you get that piece right, going back to that ROI piece, it just starts to multiply every quarter, and that's then it becomes unstoppable.
Jake, one of the things that was really big for me around lessons learned and the impact was the thought leadership piece. The thought leadership that I felt I had with you and your brother Ted was very impactful, because I don't remember if you recall, but for the most part, a lot of what was happening in our space, I wasn't sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I was very much focused on
Mm-hmm.
what we were doing and how we were doing
Mm-hmm.
it, and the impact that we were having within the clinic. And over time, the deepening of our relationship in terms of really you all starting to share with me some of what was going on out there.
Sure.
You know, what were other people doing, not only in healthcare, but what are other people doing in financial services? What are other people doing in manufacturing? So it was a very powerful transition for me to really have that thought leadership and start to incorporate it in some of the planning that I was having with my team on, where are we going, how are we going to do this, what's the really big
Sure.
next step for us.
Sure.
So I just want to thank you and Stiles, and particularly obviously yourself and Ted for all that thought leadership. It was amazing.
Yeah, you're welcome, and it was a very enjoyable experience. I'm convinced that we would not have been able to really understand your needs unless we were having those conversations on an ongoing basis, and allow us to really predict what your needs are.
Yeah, I remember the phone calls where we would talk, and sometimes it would be hey, just share with us where where you're headed and so forth. And the other reason why I want to bring it up too is what I learned from that was the possibilities, likewise, even within the own organization, on how do I better leverage and how do I better partner with folks internally.
Sure.
And start to include other support groups.
Right.
And even to the point sharing some perspective and leadership with my own team. So I mean, it had a marketed impact, and so it was good.
Daryl, based on your experience across a number of different industries in driving lean transformations, I'm curious where you see lean going next. What industries?
Yeah, it's funny. We're always thinking about next, right? That's sort of our DNA. I would first say, honestly, man, there's so much still here. Right. I look at the opportunities to apply improvement work and lean transformation within manufacturing, financial services, and healthcare. We haven't even finished in this space, particularly healthcare. Healthcare is just starting. But I would say financial services, likewise, still has a long way to go. And I don't know anybody who's not still plugging away in manufacturing and looking at how to do it better. So what's next for me? I say, from my vantage point of what's next, I'd say I would encourage the continued focus in application in these existing industries where it's either whether it's been there for a very long time or it's just starting out. That'd be the most immediate. As you start thinking about that, beyond that, I start pondering what are other areas that require attention. That's sort of our beacon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where can we perhaps help? Academia is an interesting one. If you think about it, if you think about more recently, think about how much you've heard about the cost of going to college, the cost of universities. And even if you go, well into, forget the even post-secondary, you could go all the way into elementary. The opportunities to figure out how to make the teaching and the education more efficient and more effective is a pretty sizable challenge, I think, and I could see some possible applications associated with that for lean and other improvement work in that space. I don't know what you think, but
As a parent, a long way from having to pay those tuitions, I'm hoping that the competition between universities and say community colleges is going to heat up, and to really balance or drive cost out of that and make those educations more affordable.
yeah. Well, I'm facing it right now, so I don't
Yeah.
I don't have the time you have. I've got 3 that are
Right.
Somewhere in that space right now.
Right.
So the faster we can get there, the better.
Yeah,
in terms
absolutely.
of affecting that. And then I'd love your thoughts in terms of even beyond that. You know, sometimes I just sort of ponder those possibilities, and for all that we tend to apply this in for-profit, I always wonder the continued application in not-for-profit. Obviously, healthcare is a beginning of some of that, but I don't know of any not-for-profit that wouldn't be looking at how to have a greater impact of the service that they provide to help others, and to do that in a way that's as efficient as possible. So that would be another step beyond that, and then I get to really going out there, and that's third world countries and possibilities associated with it there.
Well, you know, the possibilities are endless, and in the spirit of continuous improvement, I would second one of your earlier comments around let's really focus on getting well beyond the tip of the iceberg with the industries that we're active in now.
I like that.
Manufacturing, healthcare, financial services, insurance, government, nonprofits. I mean, we really need to dig deep and continue to focus on what's going to improve those businesses, and how do we do it.
In your comment, tip of the iceberg, I think
Yeah.
that's a perfect term for it.
Right.
It's we've all seen the pictures of the
Right.
huge iceberg below,
Right.
and I think that is true. It is endless in perhaps its depth
Right.
and its breadth in terms of what could be done there. So pure opportunity.
Yeah.
Pure opportunity.
Agreed. Well, Daryl, thank you for your time today. It was a great discussion.
It's been a pleasure.
Again, Experience Improvement is the book that Daryl has co-authored that talks about the continuous improvement efforts at the Cleveland Clinic, which is a great read regardless of what industry you're in. It's got a lot of great lessons.